I would say, first of all, a big thank you to you. Stefanie is a instructional analyst at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She's also social media coordinator for the Associated Advancement in Computing Education, and a design thinker, right? Or someone who does a lot of work in design thinking. So we're very appreciative of your time and energy this morning. And I'll just turn things over to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here today. I will hide the video for now as it might overlay some of the slide information. And so I think that you're more interested in what I'm talking about than how messy my hair looks online. So the title of my talk for today is Design Thinking for Intergroup Empathy, Creative Techniques in Higher Education. And I will walk you through a few examples of how I personally use design thinking in my work at the School of Government as an instructional analyst, also in some of the consulting work I do, and then highlight two recent workshop examples, one that happened in February and one from June 2018. Feel free to ask any questions you may have using the chat window. I interestingly cannot see the chat window. It seems to be overlaid by my presentation, but I will be alerted to your question and be able to see it. And Emery, the co-host, will be alerting me to anything that you immediately want to know. Where I'm from and what I do, I work at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill at the School of Government. The School of Government is kind of a unique construct in North Carolina. We serve public officials throughout the state of North Carolina, and approximately 12,000 public officials each year walk through our gates and attend our webinars and online trainings. We work with anybody who is in public service, so that can be mayors, judges, can also be board members, so appointed as well as elected public officials, and that's our core audience. As another hat I wear is the social media coordination for the Association for the Advancement of Computing in Education. It's a fairly old organization founded in 1981, and it serves the EdTech community through several international conferences, eLearn, EdMedia, and Cite. It also publishes several journals. These are accessible through the LearnTech LIB, Learning and Technology Digital Library, and we have several social media channels. I am personally responsible for aace.org/review, so which is a blog where I supervise several interns and also blog myself. And I'm not sure if you contributed to this very nice Flipgrid activity. I personally did and really enjoyed it. The conference organizers asked prior to the start of the conference, what do you expect to learn? What do you want to learn? So I'm personally here because I want to talk to all of you about design thinking, but I'm also interested in open educational resources, and I currently have a couple of projects where we think through digital citizenship and civic education. I hope to learn something that is applicable to any or all of these fields. Coincidentally, I had the pleasure of interviewing Jim Leslie, the CEO of Flipgrid, and if you go to aace.org/review, you will find that as the first current article. It also mentions this very conference. And Flipgrid has recently been acquired by Microsoft, so it's a huge success story of a small startup that was founded at a university. It's a fascinating interview. I can highly recommend it. But now to the actual topic of my talk. What I want to do today is give you a little bit of background, theoretical background on design thinking. I want to cut that fairly short, and then talk about a few workshop examples and methods that I use. Then I'll describe two recent workshop case studies. I'll share some of the evaluation results with you, and hopefully we have a good discussion with lots of ideas in the end. First of all, I would like to know from you, do you all have any prior experiences with design thinking? Could I have the first poll to find that out? Do you all see a poll right now that you can take?
Yes, I think it should be up, and what we got is 6 people said they yes, have had a prior experience with design thinking, and 14 people said no, they have not had an experience.
So for the 6 of you who will be a little bit bored maybe, I'll try to keep it very concise, and for the rest of you, I hope you will walk away with a fairly thorough understanding and some ideas where you can receive more information. Design thinking is first and foremost a problem-solving method, and it's geared to overcome wicked problems that have no right or wrong solution and resist traditional scientific and engineering approaches. And this is because the information needed to understand the problem depends upon one's idea for solving it. So whereas a traditional model looks like pretty much like this, I have a problem definition and that I can analyze this, and then I synthesize information and come to my solution. And somebody can ask me, tell me what success looks like, and can give a clear answer. Wicked problems are typically all those interesting problems that are found in social and political and economic contexts, also in classrooms, where the factors that influence the outcome are not quite as clear-cut. The information needed is not well defined. The consequences of your decision do not happen during one specified time frame, but whatever your solution is, whatever you come up with, might have cascading effects over time. So whenever you want to use design thinking, it's a good idea to make sure that you're actually looking at a wicked problem. So if you want to use this creative, playful, sort of gamified approach to finding solutions and coming up with ideas, I've created a checklist, and I wouldn't think that you either have a wicked problem or you don't, so it's not a yes or no, it's more a continuum, but based on Brittle and Weber's work, I have come up with a 10-question checklist that you can answer yes or no to, or try to decide how wicked is my problem actually. So typical characteristics is, for instance, that there are many stakeholders who are qualified and justifiably have an opinion of whether your solution is a good or bad one. Typically, solutions that you could, for a wicked problem are not true or false, right or wrong, but they're more or less suitable, more or less good or bad, and that often might depend on your standpoint. You can find this checklist using the QR code or the Google shortcode. So, design thinking is a problem-solving method geared to overcome wicked problems, but how? What does that mean? Well, first and foremost, it aims at transcending the immediate boundaries of the problem to ensure that the right questions are being addressed. The process of design thinking foresees steps that allow participants to analyze, synthesize, diverge, and generate ideas from many different domains. And they do this through drawing, prototyping, storytelling, so lots of playful approaches. They are encouraged to see constraints as sources for inspiration. And the results of a design thinking process are typically not directed towards a technological quick fix, but what you get is that learners are put into contexts that makes them think and work like an expert designer. And thereby, design thinking fosters civic literacy, empathy, cultural awareness, and risk-taking, at least in theory. There are a few related approaches that are around that resemble design thinking or overlap with design thinking. One that I particularly like is Lego Serious Play. It's a collaborative creative method that uses Lego blocks and Lego figures to develop scenarios, and it's typically applied in organizational development, conflict resolution, or I personally use it a lot in web design. This approach uses making and creating to foster learning, listening, and collaborating. And oftentimes when you bring a bunch of Lego bricks into a meeting, it just gets more enjoyable. And building solutions and prototypes using bricks puts participants in creates a flow experience, puts participants in a state that makes it easier for them to discuss tough topics, to actually listen to each other, to look at each other's designs and approaches, and not just put forward their idea and push through with their point of view. Another related approach to design thinking is participatory design. It's an approach that involves the users of a product early on in the development process. This is based in the theory of action research, so it has a lot to do with empowerment, social empowerment, and it describes a paradigm shift from users as subjects that you have to research, and then you come up with a solution for these people, to users as partners. So you see the people who use the product as co-designers. I love participatory design. In my work, that's the approach I always try to follow. I always try to take people and their expertise serious, and I very much try to design websites and web systems with them whenever I come up with new educational technology tools instead of for the learners. So, however, there are some difficulties. For instance, people may have difficulties organizing or expressing their ideas, difficulties harmonizing implicit design goals. So they might have implicit goals that they bring forward, but they don't really clarify these, or different implicit goals might not correspond to one another. And once you have your mind set on something, it's oftentimes very hard to maintain openness. So to remain open for input from others, to maybe discard a solution that's just not ideal. And with all of these barriers, I personally find that design thinking can be very helpful in overcoming these. One word of warning. I love this quote from Kimball, 2011. Even on a cursory inspection, just what design thinking is supposed to be is not well understood either by the public or those who claim to practice it. Well, I claim to practice it, but I want to be clear that this is just how I do it. And there's not one right or wrong way for doing design thinking or related approaches, but there is a lot to be gained from listening to one another and learning from each other's experiences in building expertise in this domain. Probably one of the more seminal resources on design thinking is this 80-minute interactive video that's a crash course developed by the Hasso-Plattner Institute in 2005. The D School began to teach design thinking to engineering students, and the philosophy behind this venture was a conviction that it is possible to train engineers and scientists to become innovators. And that's why the D School started to turn towards design thinking and to make students go through a design thinking cycle of emphasizing, defining the problem, generating ideas, prototyping, and then testing. And I can highly recommend this 80-minute interactive video. You can watch it by yourself or ideally with a partner in a group, and it'll walk you through all the exercises needed, all the materials needed, and the type of exercises that you would typically do in a design thinking cycle. I have used design thinking or related techniques in different contexts chiefly for website redesigns, also for designing new web apps and tools, and in designing courses or curricula. Website redesigning a university website or redesigning an organizational website is an extremely challenging task that ticks off all the boxes of a wicked problem. You have stakeholders, you have implicit and explicit conflicting agendas. The website, even when it is done, will keep changing because new content is added. People interact with it over time. There's not one stopping point where you can say, okay, this is finished, this is how it looks, it's great. There are continuous effects that will happen long after you're done designing and scheming and planning. And there are lots of people who feel they are qualified and who have very strong opinions about what should be placed in the forefront, what is important, how it should be presented, etc. The same, in a similar way, goes for course design or curricular design. In 2017, I had the pleasure to run a series of 10 course design workshops for our Public Executive Leadership Academy program. And that was a similar experience. What is important? If we teach a one-day class on, for instance, public leadership, what should be part of it? What shouldn't be? Let me give you a few examples of how I've used design thinking in the past. One of this is, for instance, coming up with a new categorization scheme for our website. So we wanted to be able to categorize and archive and make it easier to find our content, but we needed to come up with basically a taxonomy. And I used several techniques. One was to print out some of the current navigations of different sites and resources to see what do we want to keep, what is more important, what is less important. Others were just to print out screenshots of some of our resources and let people tag them. So literally put little printout tags on these. And this led over time to a refined understanding of, for instance, how our courts group, our legal topics are organized. Another thing that I like to do when I consult on how people can redesign and innovate in their web experiences is I ask them, please think about your website as a museum and design a flyer for this museum. What are the 10 things you want to point your visitors to? What are the highlights? What should people really not miss? And once you've identified those 10 things, then it's easier to say, okay, this is what should go on the homepage. This is what should be accessible on the main menu. This is what we want to highlight in the sidebar or in a slider, etc., etc. This is one exercise with regards to web design that I particularly like because here at the School of Government, we work with the content management system Drupal. We also work with WordPress, but most of our complex sites are built in Drupal. And Drupal offers the ability to create content types very easily. So to structure pieces of content based on the information that is provided. And at the School of Government, we have a lot of web assets based on our publications and our courses that we put out. So one of the things that we did when redesigning our website was that we assigned faculty as information curators in a workshop exercise, and I gave them visual building blocks and a glue stick and large posters, and they came up with what are the elements of a report, what are the elements of a book. And we then mocked up a prototype for each of these information types and then discussed it and refined it over time. And here is why I like Lego Serious Player. I have found that very inspiring. Another thing that I do for web design projects is that I use Lego bricks. I personally like using Lego Duplo instead of the little Legos, the small Lego bricks. because they are cheaper and you can more easily work in a larger group together. What I typically do is I have Lego pieces that represent content, Lego plates that represent sections of a site, and then I use cards and sticks and Play-Doh to annotate. And so people can create a version, for instance, of their menu structure, or can basically create a site map, and they build it with Legos. I already mentioned that I have also used design thinking for course design. In our course design series for the Public Executive Leadership Academy, we asked typical clients, typical learners who come to our classes, and invited them to the School of Government, and we asked them to design a one-day workshop for locally elected officials. And during that planning session, the representatives of our potential target audiences decided upon the deliverables. So we talked about learning objectives. We talked about what matters after participants have left the class. So in our design workshops, people came up with competencies, what content really counts, what needs to be delivered, and they decided on how to deliver it. So in the end, we walked out with a fairly good plan and structure for 6 hours of instructional activities after each workshop. One of the things that we did at the beginning of these course design workshops is we asked our visitors, what's on your plate right now? We wanted to get input from the participants on the problems they are currently working on problems that public officials are typically facing. And then we would talk about, well, what strategies do we at the School of Government need to teach to get these things off your plate? Another thing that often instructors struggle with is time. Time is kind of the magic ingredient to any pedagogical setting, to any course. So you want to use your time wisely. And after we talked about all the things that people should be learning in our classes, we talked about, well, how do we structure this? How do we break it down? And we gave each group the opportunity to plan up to 4 hours in the morning or in the afternoon. And again, here we used Lego plates to symbolize time as a constraint, and Lego bricks to symbolize the different structures of activities, for instance, group sessions, individual sessions, a lecture session, etc. So in the end, we had a visual overview, a visual map of how a day, a workshop day could flow potentially. So this is one way of how you can use Lego bricks to break things down. For instance, I had large plates that symbolize 2 hours, half the size 1 hour, quarter the size 30 minutes, and smaller bricks that represented 15 minutes. Another exercise that I oftentimes use when doing design thinking approaches are personas. Personas are fictional yet data-driven user biographies, and oftentimes we have some data about who comes to our classes, we have survey results, etc., but that data doesn't really speak to us in the sense of that it's easy to make decisions based upon that. So 80% said they prefer X over Y. And this is a typical age group, 33 to 39, etc. That doesn't really allow you to engage in storytelling or design activity. And personas force people to take the user's point of view and advocate from a user's point of view, instead of saying, well, I typically like it when websites have the navigation right there, or do this, and it really annoys me when this happens when I click there. So it forces you to go out of your own comfort zone and think, emphasize and think from another person's point of view. Before I come to the case studies, which are the result of a collaboration.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
The earlier slide, do you think it would be helpful in a course redesign or design experience to maybe have faculty fill out one of those personas based on what they think the student perception of the course might be?
Yes, absolutely. I've used personas in that way. So I've used personas in a faculty workshops, asking faculty, okay, here are some photos of all the undergrads that could possibly sit in your class. Create either a typical student or create a student that baffles you, or create a student that challenges you, and give them a background, give them things, tell me what this student is interested in, tell me why this student listens or does not listen in your class, tell me how often he or she comes to class, tell me their preferred pronoun, tell me their life goals or their vision for their course of study. And that is a great way of making faculty think from the student's perspective. And it also is a great way of opening everybody's mind to the fact that, yes, my course is not the only one in the world, or my site, my resource, my goals are not the only goals. There are people there who, actually real people who will be using this, or who are sitting in front of me and who have their own needs and their own stuff going on. And I'm just one teeny tiny part of their universe.
Great, great. As a follow-up, Susie even put in she liked the idea, and I think she was asking about using personas for students who might require accessible materials, such as students using screen readers. And that might help faculty understand the barriers facing students requiring accommodations, accessible materials in an online course.
Absolutely. I have started to try to trigger more responses more geared towards diversity and inclusion through personas. And I think this is a great method of doing so. And I've not found the end-all be-all way of doing this, but one way of how you can manipulate this is by selecting the photo material that you hand out. You can also give people certain constraints in how they create their personas. And it might lead for them to the learning experience, oh, I don't know anything about how people with a screen reader might use my site or or attend my course, or what that really means. And that can be the starting point to then say, okay, do your research, talk to somebody, or find out more. And because if you're not able to put yourself in somebody else's shoe, maybe it means that your experiences are not diverse enough to be inclusive in your teaching, or to be inclusive in your design. Before I go on to presenting the 2 case studies I've done at Münster University, Germany, I would like to quickly do the second poll. I've presented you with several ideas at this point of what you can do with design thinking or different techniques for design thinking, and I am curious if any of this was at all useful to you. Did you walk away with anything that is applicable in your own professional context? So did you get like nothing, 1 idea, 2 to 3 ideas, or 4 or more ideas of what you could do after this talk is over?
Stefanie, are you able to see that poll as well?
Yes, I am.
Very good.
Okay, I don't really see any answers on your end. Is that, oh, I do. Great, thank you. So 2 to 3 ideas mostly. I would be extremely pleased if you use a chat window to maybe write down 1 idea that you particularly like, because we will summarize that in the end and share it with everybody. So maybe your great idea might also help somebody else. So if you find the time, or if I talk about something that's less interesting to you, I would very much welcome you to do that. So
I think we've had quite a bit of discussion about the personas and maybe the ways that these could be used. I also think there was a question about maybe the handout. And I wonder if it's the handout for personas. I did share the link to the slide share, but if people wanted a copy of the personas handout, would...
Absolutely. Somewhere in my slides. Ooh, let me go back. Let me back up a little bit. When I talked about the 90 or 80 or 90-minute course by Stanford D School, there was a link on that slide that also has a QR code that leads to a repository with my materials. But I will also send that link out afterwards. For that to happen, I will need to have your email addresses. So if you would like to receive materials from me after both the slides and additional literature and handouts and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all of that is all of what I do is open access and open content. So feel free to use it, reuse it, reshare it. Just put your email in the chat window so I have the ability to reach out to you afterwards. Let's move on to the first case study. This was a great opportunity for me to do a design thinking workshop. I'm native German, so obviously I always love to travel to Germany, but this was also a very interesting workshop theme. The group that I worked with had funding to come up with ideas for inclusive community development. So they wanted to design neighborhoods for more engagement, for more social cohesion, and for more inclusion. This research cluster participation and well-being in an aging society or with changing demographics included faculty from different disciplines, but it also, in the workshop, we had city planners, architects, and several students from different disciplines. Here's what we did. First of all, I started out with an icebreaker, and that's something I can really recommend for design thinking type workshops, because this is a method that relies so much on people being willing to draw, to scratch, to be creative, to use their hands to do stuff. And so your warm-up should ideally draw them into this, literally and figuratively. So the first thing I asked was, draw a map of your own neighborhood. And what are some barriers to inclusiveness and social activities that you experience? But also, who do you never meet in your own neighborhood? And why do you think that is? So that was a question aiming at how diverse do you think your neighborhood is? Or is everybody around you just like you? And we found out this was a really fascinating and fruitful activity. But one of the things was that we identified some unexpected barriers to engagement, inclusion, building community. This was somebody who is probably solid, upper middle class, suburbia, and he said, I do not ever interact with the people in my neighborhood. Everyone has a house with a garden, every yard is fenced in, and everyone gets home from work to do their own thing. And he said, I don't even know how I could change that, or if I wanted to, or what would happen. That's like just the idea. It's like crazy. But yes, so we, when we came to the design thinking part, we actually had quite a few ideas of how do you break that up? Does really everything has to happen? Like how does that make you feel? Wouldn't it be nice if you would actually know your neighbors and interact with them? We then tried to shift from, okay, talk about your own experience, your own neighborhood, to taking somebody else's point of view. And this is where we use the personas exercise. I gave people a brief overview of statistical data on typical demographics in a German neighborhood. And just to make it easy, I said, okay, imagine 100 people. Of those 100 people, here's the how the age breakdown is. The different age brackets. Here's how many people will be migrants. Here's how many people will be 80 years and older. Here's how many people will be 90 years and older. Here's how many children will be around. Here's how many people will have a disability. And of those, so and so many will have a severe disability that impacts their mobility, etc., etc. Then I gave them posters with different prompts and a variety of headshots to choose from. So again, the goal was to construct these fictional biography outlines and reflect on this person's needs and barriers for civic inclusion. So I asked, for instance, a little bit about where for this person does civic engagement happen and where and what are his or her barriers. And the outcome were 11 different personas. And this for us was the starting point to then actually engage in a classic design thinking cycle. So the personas and their legends delivered the necessary context for design decisions and priorities in the next step of the creative process. During the design thinking process, participants typically cycle very rapidly through a series of tasks that prompt them to observe, brainstorm, synthesize, prototype, and then discuss. I asked in this workshop every participant to work in a team of 2, and these dyads went through 4 design sheets in which I gave, again, very structured and targeted prompts. My first one was define and focus. So they were asked to pick one of the personas, not necessarily the ones they created themselves, any of them, and specify, okay, what is this persona's problem? What social inclusion problem does this person have? What that I want to solve to make this person's life better? The next step is to generate ideas very rapidly during a time frame of maybe 8 minutes, 3 to 5 ideas, and then debate them with a partner. Then after discussing this, select one idea and sketch it out. And then again, build and present the prototype in a 3-dimensional representation. And I gave people cardboard, paper, tape, clay, stickers, sticky notes, glue, scissors, you name it. Yarn is also very helpful oftentimes. You can put out Legos, Lego bricks. All of these are typical things. Play-Doh is another typical design thinking material. And here's what happened. Here are some of the things people built. And obviously, this doesn't really say anything to you now, just seeing these models, but each person took their model, walked up front, tried not to sneeze, and then presented their solution and talked about it, and people were able to move it around, to maybe add to it, rethink it, build up on it. We did 2 cycles of these, so I think we in the end had, 25 to 30 different designs. There are many that I really liked, but one that particularly spoke to me was the idea of a school bus for seniors. So we, in Germany, similar to the US, but a little differently structured, we have Meals on Wheels for people who cannot cook for themselves anymore, and it's oftentimes celebrated as a way to stay in your own house, stay in your own apartment longer and not having to move to assisted living or a care facility. But it also means that people experience their food, a meal, one of the most basic human social activities, in a very isolated fashion, in a very lonely fashion. And so this idea is, well, instead of driving meals to every person so that they can singularly eat, why don't we try to get this transportation to take people to the place where we serve food? And why should it just be them? Why can't we make it a neighborhood place where people who work, people who have kids might also come and join a lunch hour? And then we suddenly have a situation where we not only have old people, but we have young people, we have children, we have young professionals, we have people who are too busy to cook. And suddenly we have this type of engagement that we really, really want to see in our society, in our neighborhoods. So that's just one example to illuminate how this worked. The second case study was very different in terms of purpose and target audience, but as you can see in the next few minutes, I've actually used similar techniques but obviously then with different outcomes. I'm sorry, there's a typo. So this workshop happened not in February, it happened in June 2018. Again, I did a design thinking workshop at Münster University of Applied Sciences. This time the workshop's theme was pedagogical planning for engineers. And the purpose was to train engineering students to become vocational school teachers. So Germany has this fairly not necessarily unique, but it's different from the United States approach to vocational training, whereas students, pupils who want to go on a vocational track can do that at age 16, 17, sometimes 18. Sometimes so you have people who already finished a university degree and then decide to, for instance, become a plumber or become a construction worker, and all of these people have a contract with, for instance, a factory or manufacturer or a builder to provide hands-on instruction and training and supervise them, but they also attend so-called vocational schools, and these vocational schools are supposed to, even though everybody's working environment and working context is different, are supposed to provide the general education so that I don't just know how plumbing works in my little company, two people company that I have my vocational training contract with, but that I can then go and work anywhere else in the country, and I have a comparable education to any other plumber. So in this case, I had 10 students, and the location was an innovation lab at the university that they had just finished building or just finished equipping. And that was really, first of all, a great location. It was a very interesting group, because vocational schools really need teachers. They have difficulties finding teacher candidates, and obviously you can see if you're an engineer with a higher education degree, you can possibly find financially more lucrative work. So you have to really try to get people excited about teaching and about what it means to be a teacher. This was the very first time that these students were confronted with the challenge of thinking as a teacher. So this was one of the very, very few pedagogical classes on pedagogy and pedagogical approaches, how to be an instructor, how to plan a lesson that they will receive during their course of study. And again, I started with letting them do a drawing, and here you see that one of the walls in this innovation lab room was a whiteboard, and so they could draw it straight on the walls, which made it very fun. In this case, I asked participants to draw a teaching and learning setting, and none of them had prior teaching experience, but all of them had experienced teachers and people teaching them, and they were all experienced learners, as we all are. So I asked them to draw a setting in which they were either totally blown away by what happened in the classroom and thought this was amazing, or where they felt really uncomfortable and thought, oh, this is all over my head, what am I even doing here? And so after they all presented their little sketches and scenarios, we all had probably a good idea of what are the teachers we want to be, and who are the teachers we want to be, and what are the traits of teachers we don't want to be. Like, who do we want to become? What are our goals in teaching? We then moved on and formed 2 groups. Since this was building, one was Introduction to Building with Wood, and another one was Introduction to Building with Concrete. And we practice something that's very important in curricular planning and lesson planning, to both think small, think about the next lesson, but also think big. Place this lesson into the context of your overall topic, or place this topic into the context of a curricular unit. And does it all fit? Does it all work? So the typically they thought, oh, we have all the time in the world. And at first they were more like, oh yeah, we can spend an hour on this and 3 hours on this and 5 hours on this, because they were trying to fill up their time. But then when they looked at the curricular unit and all the learning goals they wanted to cover for that unit, they started to be like, oh no, maybe we can just do that in half an hour. So that was a very interesting process for them. Again, I used the personas exercise and asked students to work in teams of 2 to create different personas of people they might face in the classroom. And then I asked them, well, think about all the people, about the different personas. Think about what would happen if you had all of them in your classroom, and imagine a teaching situation. And let's talk about your fears. What are worst case scenarios? And it's a little hard to see, but they created little comic sketches or wrote little stories, and I made them act those out. And so that was a good way of talking about what can go wrong, but also how can I handle things when, for instance, an exercise goes off track. And the personas also offered a foil to discuss questions of bias or questions of inclusion. Another thing that we talked about in this particular workshop were threshold concepts. A threshold concept is, this term stems from the work of Mayer and Land, who were trying to figure out why do some students struggle in STEM subjects. And they came up with this idea of threshold concepts as a portal that opens up a new and previously inaccessible way of thinking about something. So, for instance, correlation does not equal causation. That's a typical threshold concept that you learn in social sciences. Something like, just because Y happens when X happens doesn't mean that X causes Y, even though it seems so intuitive. And from there on out follows everything else. So a threshold concept is typically something, if you don't get this part, then you'll struggle later on. And May and Len came up with 5 characteristics of thresholds. They are transformative, so they drastically change how you see a subject area. They're integrated. They touch upon many other different things that you need to understand depend on you understanding this one thing. They are bounded, which means they typically are demarcation lines between this subject and another subject. So they define a subject area, or they define a certain academic culture. They're likely irreversible. So once you got it, it's hard to forget. But that also means it's really tricky to teach, because you cannot put yourself back into the state of not knowing. It's like learning to read. Once you can read, it's very hard to not read or put yourself back into the state of not reading. Once you know how to read a clock, you just see what time it is. That makes it fairly difficult. You have to deconstruct your own understanding first to be able to teach it to somebody else. And last but not least, threshold concepts are often troublesome because they are alien, they are counterintuitive, they are just ill-structured, etc. Or they don't quite fit to existing concepts and mental models that you have on your mind. What we did with these threshold concepts. Remember at the beginning of the talk I said, design thinking is a problem-solving method to solve wicked problems. So you have to come up with a problem first if you want to do design thinking. And in this case, the wicked problem were these threshold concepts. So we then took the threshold concepts that the students identified for their subject areas and randomly let each student draw a threshold concept for which they needed to develop a pedagogical approach using design thinking as a technique. So we asked them, so students, learners typically have problems understanding the isometric qualities of concrete. How do you teach that? And so what would be a good pedagogical approach? And so let's go through a design thinking cycle of figuring that out. Every student had a slightly different problem, so slightly different threshold concepts they had to tackle. And every student built models and presented their solution. What was probably my favorite moment during the workshop is we did 2 rounds again of the design thinking cycle. And in the second round, one student took two models that her peers had developed and took them apart and put them back together and came up with a third solution, with a third way of doing something. And that was just a beautiful thing to see how this actually worked out to build upon somebody else's solution and improve upon it. It also forced the participants to work just as they would in their chosen profession, because teaching in vocational schools is very much a collaborative activity. So structuring your topic, structuring the theme of the next for the next 60 hours is typically done together with colleagues. Oftentimes deciding upon methods of instruction is done in a collaborative fashion, and there's a lot of collaboration and critiquing and thinking about instruction together. So this was a really great way of practicing this. And also getting excited about it, because you could see, oh, we can, if we put time in, we can be really excellent at this. So we evaluated both workshops with a questionnaire which had 1 binary, 3 Likert, and 4 open-ended questions. We received a total of 18 responses from both groups. We distributed the survey with a personalized invitation link, and I lotteried out a design thinking book as a prize, as an incentive to take part in the survey. I will not go into each and every question in detail, but I do have one sample question from the survey that I would like to ask you to answer now, so we can see how your answer compares with what the workshop participants think. Can we do the third poll, please? So one of the things I was really curious about is how effective is design thinking in actually doing the thing that I personally value most, to increase empathy with for instance, as a teacher or as a teacher-to-be with other learners, or as a civic engineer, or as an architect, or as a city planner with the population who will actually live in this quarter, or use this new neighborhood center, or use this new service. So I'm curious how after all that you have heard about design thinking now, what your verdict is.
Give you about 5 more seconds to complete the poll.
Okay, we have 23% very effective and 69% effective and 8% somewhat effective. Okay, let's go on to the actual evaluation results and see. So here we have, after experiencing design thinking, actually over 50%, actually 60% said it is very effective to increase empathy. And another, say, 20% found it effective, and then another 20% found it somewhat effective. So it depends. It's overall was perceived as a good way of increasing empathy. We also were interested in how well does it work to collaboratively work on ideas and concepts or to evaluate ideas and concepts. And as a general rule, the part where people work together on concepts works better than the actually evaluating. And probably the strongest piece is generate ideas and generate new ideas and concepts. We also were interested in the prototyping aspect, and specifically the building and designing. And again, it's mostly a positive response, but there are also people who found that actually not helpful and who kind of resisted this to a degree.
Hey, Stephanie, just there's no big rush on my end, but just to let you know there's a couple minutes until the soft end of the session.
Okay, and well, let me go through the evaluation results quickly. Here are some of the things that people said that they really liked. Thinking in other directions, thinking interdisciplinary, personas and prototyping, integrating different perspectives, being open and remaining open, creativity, and having a safe space to come up with completely unconventional ideas. Like, think about something that is totally crazy maybe, but work on it and be able to voice that. Negative aspects all went in a similar direction. It's hard to move from the first ideas to really further develop to something that's innovative or marketable. So you are not done after your design thinking cycle. You're actually just at the beginning, and you need to do more research. And so to be able to do a realistic assessment of ideas and approaches. And that is just not part of a typical design thinking process as such. That's something that needs to come on top and afterwards, either in an individual reflection or as a group. For me, the lessons learned from these two workshops were that for my personas approach, I really still like this method. But one thing that baffled me, for instance, with the participants in some of the workshop participants, were that they chose headshots that, for instance, showed a transgender person, but then the persona biography was like a typical middle-class white female. So they kind of mainstreamed my prompts for diversity. And I think you have to be, if you want to specifically go for diversity and inclusion, you have to give more specific prompts. Or if you, for instance, saying create a persona that significantly differs from your own background. The second thing is that you need to make sure that participants don't create a caricature, but they need to create personas that feel a connection to, so that they take seriously that they really want to work for or work with, and not just especially when you work with students. I felt that some of them were just like, oh yeah, let's go as crazy as possible and make this person as weird as we can possibly think of. And that is not necessarily helpful if you want to then try to use that as a tool for creating empathy. Lessons learned in the design thinking cycle. I like doing 2 rounds of design thinking because people typically get faster in the second round and they can build up on ideas that were presented in the first round. but they can also get tired out. So you have to plan for that and maybe gives them a better way of working on somebody else's idea or collaborating with others if they feel. So sometimes you have a participant who says, but I can't think of anything else now. Sometimes things go quicker or slower than anticipated. And so that's when you can just simply manipulate time. So your 5 minutes that you give people do not necessarily have to last 5 minutes. Sometimes they can last 8 minutes, sometimes they can last 3 minutes. So that's one trick that I like to do. You need to make sure that participants really tackle wicked problems, that they don't choose easy problems and then present a great solution. And it's like, yeah, sure, but that wasn't really that hard, was it? And last but not least, I think all of them have asked for a more structured follow-up that would allow them to further develop their idea and then share back with a group. So I've done this in a 1-day format and a 2-day format, but both if you have here in the context of a workshop, it's just not enough time, and especially if you have a 2-day format, in the evening people will not go back to their desk and then do 3 hours of research and then come back the next day just to have a more informed discussion. So maybe a blended approach, maybe something using Flipgrid could be an improvement in the future. Last but not least, I hope I maybe made you curious, or inspired you a little bit at least to consider using design thinking in the future. Here are some materials, handout for planning design thinking activities, a recent article that of the work on the inclusive community design workshops that my colleague Thilo Hart and I presented at the Media Conference in Amsterdam. And we have an upcoming conference talk at the eLearn conference in October in Las Vegas. And I will be chairing a special issue on design thinking for education for the new journal Open Education Studies that's published by De Gruyter. There is not a clear timeline for that yet, but probably sometime next year. Okay. We are a bit over time. I apologize for that, but I'm happy to take any more questions or hear any feedback. Is there?
What we might do, Stephanie, if you're okay with it, I just copied and pasted a link to the conference program into the chat. If they go to your slide, you of course have included your contact information. I also took the email addresses of the folks who copied that in the chat, and I can share that with you. But I thought it was fantastic, and you didn't get a chance to see the chat because you were presenting, but there were a lot of great questions and a lot of great ideas that were being generated, and I think I speak for us all when I say this was a very useful session. So really appreciate your time. All right.
Thank you so much. It was very, very nice talking to you all, and I am really very much looking forward to following up by email and talking to hopefully many of you individually offline afterwards, and be able to share ideas, learn what you are doing in your context with design thinking, and enjoy the rest of this great conference.
Thank you very much.
I'll be sneaking into one or more sessions myself now.
That's right. That's right. You're off the.
I'm off the hook. I can now enjoy the rest of the conference.
That's right. Absolutely. Okay. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and close up the meeting. There's about a 10-minute break until the 11 o'clock meeting starts, and all of the links are on the Google Doc that was shared with you this morning. But let us know, of course, if you have any questions. And thank you all for being a part of this.
Thanks.